The morning fog rolled low over Naval Station Coronado, wrapping the coastline in a quiet gray stillness. Inside the officers' club, laughter echoed, loud, confident, careless. But it stopped the second a 12-year-old boy stepped through the door, clutching a weathered leather rifle case. "Hey, kid," a colonel barked, his tone sharp with authority. "This isn't a playground." The boy looked up, calm, steady, almost military. "I'm waiting for my dad, sir," he said softly. Then, when asked what was in the case, his answer cut through the noise like a round through glass. "My mom's rifle." Every head turned. The colonel smirked. "Your mom was a sniper?" Silence. Then the boy's father spoke, voice tight with restraint. "She was Lieutenant Sarah Cole, Navy SEAL sniper, codename Phantom 7. That name sent a ripple through the room. But the colonel wasn't finished. "Guess the kid thinks he can shoot like mommy." The boy didn't flinch. Just met his eyes and said, clear and unshaken, "Sir, I'd like to try." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The morning haze over Naval Station Coronado was just beginning to lift when Mark Cole tightened the strap on his faded maintenance bag. He'd worn the same uniform for 3 years now, navy blue coveralls, sleeves rolled up, his name patch nearly bleached white by sun and time. To most on base, he was just another civilian technician keeping the generators alive and the plumbing from screaming. But to those who looked closer, at the way he moved, the way his eyes swept every corridor before stepping through, there was something unmistakably disciplined. A rhythm you don't learn from manuals. You learn it from years of answering to reveille, of hearing, clear, fire, move, whispered through static. Beside him walked his son, Ethan Cole, 12 years old and unusually quiet for his age. His small frame carried a weathered rifle case, almost as tall as he was. He held it the way other kids held baseball gloves, like it contained a heartbeat. They passed the flight line where gulls drifted over the surf, the low growl of engines echoing from distant hangars. Mark nodded toward the West Range complex. "Precision point's still there," he said quietly. "Hasn't changed much." Ethan's eyes followed the outline of the shooting berm in the distance. "That's where Mom set her record, right?" Mark paused. "Yeah, 300 meters. 5 rounds through the same hole. They said no one would ever top it." Today marked 3 years since Lieutenant Sarah Cole, Navy SEAL sniper, call sign Phantom 7, never came home. The official report said, "Classified operation, casualty during extraction." Mark never asked for more. He didn't need to. Some losses speak in silence. They stopped outside the maintenance office. Mark adjusted his gloves, ready for his shift. "Listen, kiddo," he said gently, crouching so his eyes met Ethan's. "Not everyone's going to understand what you're trying to do today." Ethan nodded, jaw set. "Mom said skill fades if you don't keep it sharp." That line, simple, calm, sounded almost too grown for him. Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. "She'd be proud of you, son," he managed. Ethan smiled faintly, hugging the rifle case. "Then I'll make sure I shoot clean." Inside the officers' club, the air was thick with cigar smoke and routine banter. Laughter spilled between oak tables where men in decorated uniforms swapped stories about deployments and promotions. At the center of it sat Colonel Brad Vaughn, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who never entered a room quietly. He was halfway through another tale about a perfect headshot in the desert when he noticed Ethan standing near the trophy display, a child in a simple jacket, studying the brass plaques with quiet focus. Vaughn's brow furrowed. "Hey, kid," he barked, voice echoing off polished wood. "This isn't a playground." Ethan turned politely. "Yes, sir. I'm waiting for my dad." The colonel's gaze dropped to the rifle case. "And what's in there? Toys?" Ethan hesitated. "My shooting kit, sir." The room chuckled, not cruelly, but the way adults do when they don't know how else to react. Vaughn leaned back, smirk growing wider. "Your shooting kit? Well, maybe you can show the big boys how it's done, huh?" Before Ethan could answer, a voice cut in from the doorway. "That'll be enough, Colonel." Mark had just stepped inside, grease still on his sleeves, eyes fixed on Vaughn. "My son's not here to impress anyone. He's here to honor his mother." Vaughn arched an eyebrow. "And she would be?" "Lieutenant Sarah Cole," Mark said evenly. "United States Navy SEAL, codename Phantom 7. For a brief second, the laughter stopped. A few of the older SEALs exchanged uncertain glances, but Vaughn shrugged. "Never heard of her. Probably logistics or admin." "You know how these stories grow." The words hit like shrapnel. Ethan's small hands tightened on the case. He said nothing, just stared at the floor, lips pressed together. Mark's jaw flexed. "Watch your mouth, Colonel." "Oh, come on," Vaughn scoffed. "We've all seen this before. Heroes get bigger after they're gone." That's when another voice entered the room. Female, female. "Certain. I have heard of her." All eyes turned. Master Chief Megan Cross, range instructor and former SEAL sniper trainer, stepped forward. She was tall, confident, her eyes like steel polished by years of sandstorms. "Lieutenant Sarah Cole was no story," Cross said. "She was Phantom 7, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. I trained her. She saved 12 Marines in Helmand from a rooftop overwatch when their convoy was ambushed. One of the finest natural shooters I've ever seen." Silence stretched across the room. The sound of the ceiling fan suddenly seemed loud. Vaughn blinked, caught between pride and embarrassment. "Well, maybe she could shoot," he muttered. "Doesn't mean the kid can." Cross's gaze hardened. "Respect runs in blood, Colonel." "So does discipline," Vaughn snorted, trying to recover his authority. "Then let's put that theory to the test. The range is open. If the boy thinks he's ready, he can prove it." Mark's first instinct was to refuse. "He's just a kid." But Ethan stepped forward, eyes steady. "Dad, I can do this." For a long second, father and son locked eyes, Mark seeing his wife's same unflinching calm in their boy. Finally, Mark exhaled. "Then do it right. For her." Cross nodded toward the window where the flag swayed above precision point range. "Let's see what the next generation of Coles can do." As they left the officers' club, whispers filled the room, half disbelief, half curiosity. A few SEALs followed, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Vaughn smirked, but couldn't hide the doubt creeping in. "Fine, let's see if the legend was just a lucky shot, or if it runs in the family." Outside, the California sun burned through the fog. The air shimmered above the asphalt, and in the distance, the firing line gleamed like a stage waiting for its story. Ethan adjusted the strap on the rifle case and whispered under his breath, "For you, Mom." Then he stepped toward the range, toward the moment that would silence every laugh, every doubt, and write his mother's name and his into SEAL history. The heat shimmered above precision point range, turning the air into a restless mirage. From the observation canopy to the firing line, whispers spread like static. A 12-year-old kid had just been challenged by a full-bird colonel. By the time Ethan Cole and his father arrived, half the base seemed to know. Mechanics on break leaned against Humvees. SEALs in range gear stood behind the yellow boundary line. Even a few officers from command had wandered down, curiosity tugging them away from their paperwork. It was no longer just a challenge. It was a spectacle. Captain Ryan Foster, the range safety officer, stepped forward, clipboard in hand. He was a man who'd spent years drilling precision into grown men with medals on their chests. But the boy walking toward him didn't look nervous, only focused. The same quiet, centered composure Foster had seen before every record shot he'd ever witnessed. Mark Cole followed a few steps behind his son, his boots slow, heavy. "You sure about this, Ethan?" Ethan nodded. "She trained me, Dad. You know that." The captain crouched beside him. "All right, son," Foster said, gentle but firm. "You follow every range command. You fire only when cleared. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Foster straightened, looked toward the gathered crowd, and then back to Colonel Brad Vaughn, who was standing smugly near the observation line with arms folded. "This is a controlled environment, Colonel," he said pointedly. "If this boy's going to shoot, it'll be done properly." "Fine by me," Vaughn replied. Just don't cry when he scuffs the paint on your target frames." Murmurs of laughter rippled through the officers, but Master Chief Megan Cross didn't laugh. She stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on Ethan like a coach studying a student before his first championship. Foster placed an M16 rifle on the table. "We'll start at 25 meters, he announced. "Standard test, iron sights only." Vaughn rolled his eyes. "That's a toy range. Safety first," Foster countered. "He's 12. Ethan didn't respond. He simply lifted the weapon with both hands, no trembling, no hesitation, and dropped to the prone position. His movements were clean, almost rehearsed. He settled into the dust, cheek against the stock. "Breathe in. Exhale halfway." "Hold." His whisper was barely audible, but Cross caught it. Her lips tightened. It was Sarah Cole's breathing cadence. The exact same rhythm she had taught in sniper school. The crowd fell silent. Crack. A single report echoed through the range. The metallic ping came half a second later. Foster looked through the spotting scope, adjusted once, and said flatly, "Bullseye." Dead center. A soft wave of murmurs followed. Vaughn scoffed, trying to hide his discomfort. Beginner's luck. Ethan loaded 4 more rounds, every motion deliberate, breathing steady. Crack. 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 When Foster walked up to the target and came back, his face said everything. 1 hole. All 5 rounds through the same point of impact. 1-inch grouping. The crowd stirred. SEALs trading uneasy glances, a few even whistling under their breath. Cross whispered to no one in particular, "That's textbook discipline." Vaughn stepped forward. "Short range doesn't prove anything. My turn to pick the distance." 300 meters, if the kid can even see that far. 300 it is, Foster replied. Ethan didn't blink. He reached for the weathered rifle case, his mother's. The leather creaked softly as he opened it, revealing a precision rifle so well kept it looked like new. The engraved initials, SC, glinted in the sunlight. He checked the chamber, adjusted the bipod, and spoke quietly, as though to himself. "Winds 5 miles southwest." "I'll adjust 2 clicks right." Cross heard it and felt her throat tighten. That's exactly how Sarah used to do it. The target was moved to the 300-meter line. The distance made it look no bigger than a coin against the horizon. Ethan lay prone again, his body aligned perfectly with the rifle. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed down, but he seemed untouchable, locked into his own steady world. Foster leaned toward the radio. "Range is hot." "Fire when ready." Ethan inhaled. The trigger broke clean. Crack. Seconds later, Chief Petty Officer Santoro, the spotter, blinked hard through his scope. Dead center, clean hit. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. One SEAL removed his cap. Another muttered, "No way!" Vaughn's smirk wavered. "Lucky shot." 5-round group, Foster suggested. Ethan nodded, expression calm. He adjusted, settled back behind the rifle, and fired again. 1 shot. Then another, and another. Each sound, crack, 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 felt heavier than the last, echoing across the open range until even the birds fell silent. Foster turned toward Santoro. "Talk to me, Chief." Santoro didn't answer immediately. He just stared through the scope, lips slightly parted. 5 rounds, all within 1.5 inches. Center mass. That's advanced sniper level grouping. A wave of disbelief rolled through the spectators. The murmurs were gone now, replaced by stunned silence. Ethan stood slowly, brushing sand from his knees. He didn't grin, didn't boast. He simply looked toward the target, then to the sky. "For you, Mom." Cross swallowed hard. "Sarah, if you're watching this," she whispered under her breath, "your boy just rewrote the book." Vaughn, red-faced and desperate, stormed up to Foster. "This doesn't prove anything." "He's shooting off a rest. Let's see him do it unsupported." Kneeling. Full metal targets. Mark Cole started forward. "That's enough, Colonel. He's proven." Ethan's small voice cut through. "It's okay, Dad. I can do it." He stepped back to the firing line, lifted the rifle into position without the bipod, and knelt. His frame was small, the weapon almost too large, but his form stayed perfect. He adjusted once more for wind, then fired. Fleg-beg-beg-da. Pinga. Foster raised the binoculars. The steel plate at 300 meters rocked backward with a clean strike. Dead center again. This time, even Vaughn couldn't speak. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one laughed. Even the flags by the tower drooped into stillness, as if the base itself was paying respect. Ethan slowly ejected the last round, placed it neatly beside the rifle, and stood. "Is that enough, sir?" he asked, voice steady, directed at Vaughn. Vaughn opened his mouth but found no words. Cross finally stepped forward, her tone steady but filled with awe. That was no fluke. That was legacy. Foster nodded in agreement. "I've seen SEAL instructors miss that clean on a calm day." He didn't even overcorrect. Mark rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did good, son." The crowd began to shift, the energy different now. SEALs stood straighter. Officers lowered their voices. Something sacred had unfolded before them, something rare and humbling. Then, just as Foster was about to call the range cold, a deep whoop 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 echoed in the distance. Everyone turned toward the coastline. A helicopter, navy markings, dark gray, was descending fast toward the landing pad behind the range. Foster shaded his eyes. "That's a Pentagon bird." Cross exhaled. Word travels fast. The downdraft from the rotors swept dust across the field as the chopper touched down. 2 command aides stepped out first, then a tall woman in crisp uniform, Admiral Caroline Wells. Her presence alone made the SEALs snap to attention. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't glance at the colonel. She just pointed toward the range. "Who's the shooter?" And as Ethan turned toward her, the sunlight caught the brass engraving on his rifle. SC, the initials of Lieutenant Sarah Cole. The Admiral's expression softened, as though she'd seen a ghost. But before anyone could speak, Foster whispered under his breath, "This just became history." And for one suspended moment, under the hum of the blades and the stunned silence of the crowd, even the flags above Precision Point Range seemed to stop moving. Colonel Vaughn's jaw tightened, his pride unraveling in front of everyone. The boy's precision had already silenced half the base, but Vaughn wasn't ready to surrender his authority, not to a 12-year-old. "Fine!" he barked, voice cracking just slightly. 5-shot group. No rest. 300 meters. Let's see what happens when the toy gets heavy. Captain Foster's eyebrows lifted. "Colonel, he's already proven." "Let him shoot," Vaughn snapped, "or admit it's all coincidence." The murmur swelled again. Even the SEALs who had laughed earlier shifted uneasily. They'd all seen marksmanship contests, but none like this. A child, calm under scrutiny, standing across from a decorated colonel who looked more nervous than he did. Mark Cole rested both hands on the observation rail, knuckles white. His heart thudded against his ribs, each beat echoing memories of his wife's last words before deployment. "Teach him focus. Teach him calm." Ethan quietly reloaded. 5 rounds clicked into the magazine, precise and deliberate. The range went still. He dropped into position, kneeling this time, just as Vaughn demanded. The rifle looked far too large for his frame, but his form stayed perfect, elbows locked, stock tucked firmly into his shoulder. A faint breeze swept across the sandberm. Ethan tilted his head slightly, watching the flags at the far end. "Winds shifting east," he murmured, almost to himself. 1 minute right. Mark swallowed hard. "Steady, son," he whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "Just like Mom taught you." Ethan inhaled once, exhaled halfway. If yelled. Crack. The sound rolled across the range like a drumbeat. Through the spotting scope, Chief Santoro froze. Impact, center, perfect hold. Vaughn crossed his arms, feigning calm. 4 more to go, he muttered. Ethan didn't flinch. He fired again, then again. 5 measured shots, each separated by the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. When the final round echoed into silence, Foster raised his binoculars. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then his voice carried over the range loud and clear, 1.5-inch group at 300 meters. Every shot center mass. That's SEAL sniper-level accuracy. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with stunned disbelief. Officers stepped forward, shaking their heads in awe. One whispered, "That's not possible without a spotter." Master Chief Cross smiled faintly, eyes glistening. She trained him well. Even the seasoned SEALs, men who'd carried rifles into more deserts than they could count, began to nod in respect. No laughter now, no smirks. Just quiet acknowledgement of greatness. Colonel Vaughn stood motionless, face pale. The weight of humiliation pressed deep beneath his collar. He looked around for someone, anyone, to share the blame with. But no one met his eyes. Captain Foster called, "Range cold," and stepped toward the boy. He knelt beside him, voice low but reverent. "Ethan, that was extraordinary." "You know what you just did?" Ethan shook his head. "I just wanted to shoot clean, sir." The captain smiled. "You did more than that, son. You just made history." A ripple of low conversation rolled through the spectators. Some officers began filming the targets for verification. Others simply stood, hats in hand. Vaughn tried to speak, to reassert control, but his voice faltered. This doesn't count." "He's not enlisted. This isn't official protocol." Foster cut him off sharply. "With respect, Colonel, what we just witnessed transcends protocol." Cross added softly, "What we witnessed was legacy." The tension hung in the air, heavy but electric, like the moment before a storm. Then the unexpected shattered it. The phone at the range office rang. Once, twice, then a third time. The duty officer picked it up, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. He looked toward Foster. "Sir, command says a helicopter's inbound from the Pentagon. Immediate landing clearance requested for Precision Point." Foster frowned. "The Pentagon?" Cross's eyes widened slightly. Someone must have sent word up the chain. The distant thump of rotor blades began as a faint tremor, growing louder with each second. Dust rose in waves across the tarmac. SEALs turned instinctively toward the sky. Within moments, a dark gray helicopter came into view, Navy markings gleaming against the afternoon light. The blades beat the air like thunder, scattering papers and sand across the field as it descended. The range flags whipped violently, snapping in salute. Foster shielded his eyes from the wind. "That's not a local bird. That's high command." Vaughn squinted upward, trying to recover his composure. "Probably routine inspection," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Cross glanced at him, then at Ethan. "No, Colonel," she said softly. "That's not routine. That's someone important coming here." The helicopter settled onto the pad with a final gust that rippled through the watching crowd. 2 Navy aides stepped out, holding their caps against the downdraft. And then, from the shadow of the rotor wash, a tall woman in a crisp uniform emerged. Admiral Caroline Wells, the Pentagon's oversight commander for special operations. Her silver hair gleamed beneath her cap, her gaze sharp, assessing. The field went silent again. Foster whispered to Cross, "How in the world did she get here this fast?" Cross didn't answer. She just watched as the Admiral's boots touched the ground, her expression unreadable. Wells turned toward the line of stunned officers and raised her voice above the dying roar of the rotors. "Who's the shooter?" she demanded. And just like that, every eye turned toward Ethan Cole, the boy standing at the firing line, his mother's rifle resting across his knees, his gaze steady and unafraid. The whispers began again, but this time they carried no doubt, no mockery, only awe. The wind was still whipping dust across Precision Point Range as Admiral Caroline Wells strode toward the firing line. Her aides followed 2 paces behind, their dress whites already streaked with grit. The SEALs who had gathered only moments earlier now stood rigid, hats tucked under arms. The sight of a Pentagon admiral descending on a local training range had turned what began as a joke into something that felt almost ceremonial. Colonel Brad Vaughn stepped forward first, desperate to regain control of the scene. "Admiral Wells, ma'am," he began, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land, "just a harmless base demonstration." Kid wanted to play soldier, some stunt really, nothing official. Wells didn't answer. Her boots clicked once against the concrete as she crossed to the target stands. She bent, studying the paper at the 300-meter line. 5 holes, clustered so tightly they nearly touched. The paper itself fluttered in the downwash from the departing helicopter. She said nothing for several long seconds. Then she straightened, eyes narrowing as she looked back toward the small figure still kneeling by the rifle. "You fired these?" Ethan stood, brushing dust from his uniform jacket. His voice was small but steady. "Yes, ma'am. For my mom, Lieutenant Sarah Cole." For a moment, the Admiral didn't move. Her expression shifted, shock first, then recognition, then something softer. "Cole," she murmured. "Lieutenant Sarah Cole?" Mark Cole stepped forward quietly. "She was my wife, ma'am. Killed during a classified operation 3 years ago." Wells exhaled, eyes unfocused, as if the name had pulled her through time. "Your mother saved my command in Helmand Province," she said finally. Her voice, though measured, carried the weight of memory. "Our convoy was pinned down by insurgents on the ridgeline. A sniper we couldn't see was tearing us apart. Then one of our Overwatch shooters took him out from nearly a kilometer away." She looked directly at Ethan. "That shooter was your mother, Lieutenant Sarah Cole, Phantom 7. She gave us the window to extract. We lost 3 men that day, but without her, we would have lost everyone." The crowd stood frozen. Even the colonel lowered his gaze. Wells's voice rose, sharper now, the command tone unmistakable. "Lieutenant Cole was one of the finest marksmen the Navy ever produced. I will not have her legacy mocked on my range, or any range under my command." She turned slowly, eyes locking on Vaughn. "You challenged her son?" Vaughn's mouth opened, then closed. "Ma'am, I—" "Silence, Colonel." The word cracked like gunfire. "You should be ashamed." Wells faced Ethan again. The sternness in her tone melted into something warmer. "You carry her focus, her discipline, and her heart. Today you honored not only your mother, but every SEAL who ever believed in precision, patience, and purpose." Ethan swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Thank you, ma'am. She always said, respect is something you earn at the range." Wells nodded. "And today, son, you earned it from every one of us." The air fell silent again. This time, heavy not with disbelief, but with reverence. Even the flags at Precision Point seemed to bow ever so slightly in the afternoon wind. The range fell utterly silent. Even the distant whir of the helicopter faded until all that remained was the sound of the ocean wind sweeping across the sand. Colonel Brad Vaughn stood frozen, shoulders rigid, eyes on the ground. The color had drained from his face, pride stripped bare. For the first time that day, he looked small, not from rank, but from shame. Admiral Wells turned away from him and faced the firing line again. Ethan Cole still stood beside the rifle, posture straight, eyes wide with uncertainty. He didn't seem to understand what had just happened, only that something bigger than him was unfolding. Then Master Chief Megan Cross stepped forward. Her boots crunched softly in the gravel as she stopped a few feet away from Ethan. Without a word, she raised her hand to her brow and gave a slow, deliberate salute, the kind reserved for those who've earned the unspoken kind of respect. The crowd stirred. One by one, the SEALs around the range followed. Hats came off. Heads bowed. The same men who had laughed that morning now stood motionless in quiet honor. Even Captain Ryan Foster, who'd seen combat from the Hindu Kush to the Gulf, joined them, his salute crisp, his expression solemn. Ethan blinked, unsure, then glanced toward his father. Mark Cole stepped forward, eyes glassy with tears he didn't bother to hide. He didn't speak. He just placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder, steady, reassuring, proud. The boy's lip quivered slightly as he looked up. Did I do it right, Dad?" Mark swallowed hard before answering, his voice soft and certain. "You did it exactly right." Admiral Wells exhaled quietly. "Your mother would have said the same." A hush swept over the field again. The sunlight glinted off the brass casing scattered in the dust, each one a fragment of memory, of legacy. Ethan lifted his gaze toward the flag flapping high above the range, its fabric catching the wind. The same wind that had carried his mother's voice years ago when she'd whispered lessons about calm and patience. Mark gave his son's shoulder a final squeeze. She'd be proud, son. You carried her name the way she carried that rifle, with honor. Cross lowered her salute and smiled faintly. Phantom 7's not gone, she said quietly. She just changed shape. The SEALs remained silent, still lined up behind the firing line, caps in hand, as if watching a ceremony that didn't need orders or speeches. And in that moment, under the open sky, beneath the flag that had covered both triumph and loss, a boy and his father stood where legacy met silence. The salute wasn't for the shot or the record. It was for the reminder that courage never retires. Admiral Wells stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The weight of command rested easily on her shoulders, but her voice carried a warmth that few had ever heard on this range. She turned to face the assembled officers, SEALs, and crew who now stood in rigid silence. This boy, she began, her tone firm but reverent, didn't just honor his mother today. He reminded every one of you what discipline looks like. Her gaze swept across the crowd, from the humbled colonel to the silent ranks of enlisted men. In an age of shortcuts, noise, and distraction, this 12-year-old walked onto your range with nothing but focus, respect, and the will to make every shot count. That's the standard we built this Navy on. And that's the standard we will not forget. Vaughn shifted uneasily, his head bowed. The sting of her words carried no anger, only truth. Admiral Wells turned toward Ethan, who still stood beside the rifle, his small hands folded in front of him. The boy looked at her with steady eyes. The same eyes that had once stared through a sniper scope in Helmand, only smaller, gentler. Wells softened her voice. Ethan Cole. Yes, ma'am. You understand what you did here today. He hesitated. I just wanted to make her proud. You did, she said. And in doing so, you reminded every one of us what pride should really mean. The Admiral paused, then added, If you'd like, I can see to it that you're enrolled in our Advanced Marksmanship Youth Program. It's selective, top-tier instruction, mentorship from active SEALs. We could use that kind of focus. Ethan blinked, the offer landing heavier than any medal could. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Then he drew himself upright, feet together, back straight. He raised his hand and delivered a salute. Small, precise, perfect. Thank you, ma'am, he said, voice barely above the wind. For her. The Admiral returned the salute. For her, she echoed softly. Behind them, the helicopter blades began to turn again, the rhythmic thump echoing through the air. Dust spiraled across the range, catching the sunlight in a golden haze. The American flag above them rippled hard against the breeze, snapping like a heartbeat. Admiral Wells raised her voice just enough to carry over the growing roar of the rotors. Lieutenant Sarah Cole would be proud. The SEALs stood taller. Master Chief Cross blinked back tears, her chin lifting slightly as if to say mission complete. Mark Cole pulled his cap from his head, pressing it against his chest. His voice was low, meant only for his son. Your mother's watching, kiddo, I promise you that. Ethan's gaze stayed locked on the flag, the same flag that had once been folded over his mother's casket. The wind caught the edges, unfurling it wide as if in salute. For a long, sacred moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic beat of the helicopter and the distant crash of Pacific waves. Then Admiral Wells gave one final nod. Pack up the range, she ordered. Let's remember what we witnessed here today and who we witnessed it for. As the chopper lifted off, the downwash kicked up a storm of sand and sunlight. Ethan and his father stood side by side, their silhouettes framed against the fading horizon. Mark looked down at his son, not as a child now, but as the next link in something larger. You carried her name the right way, he said. Ethan nodded slowly. She carried me first. The words hung in the air like a vow. The Admiral's helicopter rose higher, slicing through the sky. The flag above the range snapped once more, louder, prouder, alive. And beneath it, a boy stood holding his mother's rifle, the same calm steadying his breath that had once steadied hers. The crowd began to disperse in silence, but none of them would forget what they'd seen. A son of a fallen sniper, rewriting history not with arrogance, but with grace. Because that day, at Precision Point Range, Ethan Cole didn't just break records. He restored respect. The sun had begun to dip low over Precision Point Range, casting long amber lines across the concrete and steel. The crowd was gone now. The noise, the cameras, the whispers. What remained was silence and the steady hum of the flagpole ropes tapping gently in the breeze. Ethan stood before the weathered range board, the one where names were carved into brass plates beside their records. He reached up, tracing a finger over the engraved letters of his mother's name. Low. Sarah Cole, seal precision record, 300 meters. His touch lingered there, soft, reverent. The metal was warm from the day's sun, but it carried a weight beyond heat, a lifetime of sacrifice, pride, and love. Behind him, Master Chief Megan Cross and a few range technicians worked quietly, sliding a new brass plate into position just below it. The engraving caught the last rays of light. Ethan Cole broke every SEAL record, age 12. The moment felt unreal. The same wind that once carried gunpowder now carried legacy. Mark Cole stood a few steps back, hands in his pockets, his heart caught somewhere between grief and pride. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. Cross approached Ethan, her boots crunching softly in the gravel. In her hand, she held a small, worn challenge coin, the kind passed quietly between warriors who'd earned their respect, not bought it. Its edge was scuffed, the insignia almost faded. She placed it in Ethan's palm and closed his fingers around it. "This was your mother's unit coin," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "She gave it to me before Helmand, said if anything ever happened, I'd know who it belonged to." Ethan looked down at it, thumb brushing across the cool metal. "She'd want me to earn it," he whispered. Cross smiled faintly. "She'd want you to keep it sharp." Mark stepped forward and wrapped an arm gently around his son's shoulders. Together, they looked at the board one last time, the two names now joined forever in brass and memory. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, watching as the flag above caught the last light of day and glowed crimson and gold against the sky. Mark finally said, almost to himself, "Courage isn't measured by rank or by age." Cross nodded. "It's measured by the heart that carries it. Courage isn't about size or strength. It's about the discipline to act with honor, the love that outlives loss, and the legacy we pass forward. One steady breath, one clean shot, one heartbeat at a time." On that gray morning at Naval Station Coronado, a 12-year-old boy with a borrowed rifle reminded the Navy what respect truly means. He didn't need medals, permission, or applause, just purpose, patience, and a promise kept to his mother's name. He showed every soldier, every sailor, and every heart, watching that courage doesn't come from age or rank. It comes from legacy, from the love that outlasts loss and the discipline that never fades. If you believe heroes are made by heart, not by rank, then salute in the comments and subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, where true valor lives on, where legacies are honored, and where courage never fades.